The century of training. The galaxy had many wars, but none like this. The Valons, a proud alien race, had been waiting for this moment for more than 100 years. They lived for one purpose: to conquer Earth. In their eyes, Earth was not just a planet. It was a jewel of resources, water, and strategic space routes. If Earth fell, the galaxy would belong to the Valons. Generations of Valons were born inside war academies. Children did not play, they trained. Their first words were oaths of loyalty, their first steps taken with weights strapped to their legs. Their bodies grew strong, their minds sharper. Every sunrise began with combat drills, and every night ended with lessons on how to break an enemy's spirit. The Valons told themselves that humanity was fragile, weak, and undisciplined. They believed Earth's people had no idea what real war was, and so they trained to end them quickly across their homeworld. Giant citadels rose into the sky. They were not homes but fortresses. Inside, war drums echoed every morning, and sparks from weapons testing lit up the night. The sound of marching soldiers became the rhythm of daily life. For 100 years, the Valons lived in this rhythm. Their leaders promised that when the day of invasion came, Earth would not last an hour. The training was merciless. Recruits were thrown into storm arenas filled with acid rain. Those who survived were promoted. Those who failed were forgotten. They fought in vacuum chambers where the air was pulled away, forcing them to battle while suffocating. They trained on burning deserts, frozen wastelands, and drowning swamps. Every condition, every nightmare was turned into a battlefield, and through it all, one chant was drilled into their minds: Earth will fall. Scientists of the Valon Empire also worked without rest. They created plasma cannons the size of towers, bombs that could split continents, and armor that could withstand meteor impacts. They built ships darker than space, massive engines that could jump between stars in seconds. Each weapon was tested, on slave worlds, leaving ruins as proof of their power. The galaxy watched in silence, afraid to challenge them. For a century, no one dared to ask what they were building for. The soldiers grew proud. Every scar was a medal, every survival a badge of honor. Young recruits were told stories of Earth's weakness. Humans are soft, the generals said. They cling to peace. They hide behind councils. They will surrender. Once they see our fleets, the recruits laughed, confident in their future victory. For them, Earth was already a grave waiting to be filled. But deep within their arrogance was a flaw. They prepared for wars they understood. Wars of ships, of weapons, of numbers. They did not prepare for the unknown. And humanity, though quiet, was not unknown. Earth had watched them, not with fear but with patience. Every probe the Valons launched near Earth vanished. Every spy ship they sent failed to return. But the Valons dismissed it as accidents, never realizing that humans had already seen through their plans. The century of training came with a cost. The Valons forgot how to live. Their culture became nothing but war, art, music, love. These were abandoned. Even families were torn apart. Children taken from parents at birth to be trained in the citadels. The entire race was shaped into a blade, sharp, deadly, and aimed at Earth. On the eve of invasion, the Grand Council of the Valons gathered. Massive banners of victory were raised. War drums shook the ground, and 1,000 ships lifted. From the surface of their world, the fleet stretched across the sky, blocking suns as they left orbit. Inside the command ship, the High General stood tall, his voice echoing across the fleet. For a century we have trained, for a century we have bled, and now we claim Earth, he roared. The soldiers answered as one, their voices shaking the stars. Earth will fall. They believed every word. They believed humanity would collapse at the first strike. They believed their century of training had made them unstoppable. But as the fleet burned across the stars toward Earth, the universe held its breath. For somewhere in the silence of space, humanity was waiting, and what the Valons thought would be their triumph would soon become their greatest mistake, because, for all their weapons, their training, and their pride, they had forgotten one simple truth. Humans were not prey, humans were predators. And when the time came, the galaxy would remember not the century of Valon training, but the 6 minutes of human fury that erased it all. The first strike, the Ancient Valon fleet cut through the void, a black river of warships stretching for thousands of kilometers. Their engines thundered with energy. Their hulls bristled with weapons that glowed like caged suns. Each ship carried soldiers who had trained for a century, warriors whose only purpose was to land on Earth and crush it beneath their boots. The invasion had begun, and there was no turning back. From orbit, Earth looked calm. Blue oceans shimmered. White clouds drifted across continents, cities glowed with quiet lights. To the Valons, this calmness was proof of weakness. They expected panic, they expected chaos, but they saw none. The High General sneered at the sight, confident that fear would come soon enough. "Prepare the strike," he ordered. In seconds, massive plasma cannons turned toward Earth, their cores humming with energy. The Valons had chosen their target carefully. They aimed at a human city, one filled with millions of civilians. The plan was simple: destroy one city, and the rest of humanity would beg for mercy. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Every Valon soldier stood ready, their voices whispering the chant they had spoken for 100 years. Earth will fall. But in the silence between numbers, something changed. The stars around Earth shifted. At first, it seemed like a trick of light, a distortion in the void. Then the shadows grew, long and sharp, swallowing starlight. The Valons froze, their eyes wide as massive shapes emerged from the darkness. Human warships, dozens, then hundreds, sliding into view with cold precision. They were not flashy, not covered in banners or glowing armor. They were brutal and practical, forged with one purpose: to kill. Each hull carried scars of past battles, every gun mounted with deadly simplicity. These were not ships of pride, they were ships of survival. The High General's voice cracked. "Impossible, Earth has no fleet." But Earth did, and it had been waiting. Hidden in the dark edges of the solar system, humans had built in silence. They had studied the Valons, learned their weapons, and crafted counters. For every plasma cannon, humans had a railgun. For every shield, humans had a way to break it. For every century of training, humanity had 6 minutes of fury ready. The Valons fired first. Plasma storms roared toward Earth, rivers of fire streaking. Across the void, the blast lit space like a second sun, so bright that even Earth's surface saw the glow. It should have been the end. But the human fleet moved. With a precision no one expected, railguns spat tungsten slugs at near-light speed. One shot, one kill. Valon ships shattered as if they were glass, their burning hulks drifting into silence. The battle lasted seconds, but each second was death for the Valons. Their formations broke. Their confidence cracked. Commanders shouted orders, but static filled their comms. Human jammers cut through every signal, leaving the Valon fleet blind and panicked. For the first time in a century, their soldiers felt fear, and it spread like fire. Within minutes, half their fleet was gone. The High General's face twisted in rage. "We trained for this, fight back," he roared. But his voice was drowned out by explosions tearing through his flagship. A single human railgun round had pierced its shields, its hull breaking apart in silence. The Valons screamed as their pride burned. Across the battle net, AI, human voice broke through, calm and merciless. "You trained for 100 years, the voice said, and yet you lasted less than 6 minutes. The words cut deeper than any weapon. The Valons, who had believed Earth would fall, now realized the truth. It was they who were falling. As the last of the first strike ended, silence filled the void. Wreckage drifted, flames flickered against the cold of space. The Valon fleet, once so proud, was broken in moments. Earth still shone below, untouched, calm, and waiting. The invasion had begun, but it had not gone the way the Valons planned. Instead of conquest, they had awakened a predator, and humanity was only getting started. The human counter. The battlefield was chaos. Valon ships burned across the stars, their proud fleet now broken into fragments. Still, they fought, refusing to surrender, their weapons flashing desperately. But against the humans, desperation was not enough. On Earth's command channel, human officers spoke with calm voices. There was no fear, no shouting, only discipline. Every move had been planned, every weapon tested, every counter perfected. They had waited for this day, and now the trap was sprung. The Valons tried to regroup, forming their ships into new formations. They launched waves of fighters, small and fast, hoping to pierce the human line. But the human fleet adapted instantly. Swarm drones poured out from hidden bays, each one armed with smart munitions. They hunted the Valan fighters like wolves, tearing them apart one by one. A Valan commander shouted, "They were supposed to be prey, how can they fight like this?" His crew had no answer. Every second, more of their ships vanished under the brutal precision of human weapons. Railguns cracked the void, missiles darted between wreckage, lasers sliced through shields. It was not a battle, it was an execution. The High General's ship, damaged but still fighting, tried to rally what remained. He broadcast his voice across the fleet. "Remember your training, a century of preparation cannot fail." But his words sounded hollow. The soldiers remembered. Their training, acid storms, desert wars, suffocating drills. None of it had prepared them for this. None of it had prepared them for humanity. Then came the moment that shattered their spirit. A single human supercarrier, vast as a city, slid out from behind Earth's shadow. Its hull was blackened from past wars, its weapons bristling like thorns. The Valons gasped in disbelief. They had thought Earth incapable of building such a monster. Yet here it was, silent, unstoppable. The carrier unleashed its fury. Railguns thundered in rhythm, each shot punching through a Valon capital ship. Missiles streaked in clouds, breaking cruisers into fireballs. Pulse cannons carved through destroyers as if they were paper. In less than a minute, a dozen Valon ships were erased from existence. The fleet that had trained for a century was now falling apart in seconds. Human voices echoed again on open channels, calm and cold. "You prepared for war, but you never prepared for us," the voice said. "You studied conquest. We lived survival." The Valons trembled at those words. For the first time, they realized the humans had never needed centuries of training. Earth itself had trained them. Every storm, every disaster, every war in their history had forged them harder than any academy ever could. The battle clock ticked to 6 minutes. In that short span, most of the Valon fleet was gone. Ships that had taken decades to build were now drifting wrecks. The High General stared at the burning horizon, his eyes filled with disbelief. How could a century fall in minutes? How could pride turn to ashes so quickly? "Retreat," one of his commanders begged. But there was no escape. Human ships surrounded them, their guns locked on every angle. The Valons were trapped in a cage of fire. The humans did not shout, they did not cheer. They fought with the silence of predators, efficient and merciless. Every strike was precise, every kill absolute. It was not just power, it was mastery. The galaxy had feared the Valons for 100 years, but now the galaxy would fear Earth. The High General fell to his knees as his ship shook from another. Railgun hit, his pride, his empire, his century of training, all gone. And in that silence, the final words came again from the human fleet. 6 minutes, the voice said. That is all you were worth? The words echoed across the battlefield. Valon soldiers, once unshakable, now broke down in despair. Some ships surrendered, others self-destructed, unwilling to live with the shame. But the humans showed no emotion. They ended the battle as they had begun it, calm, precise, and unstoppable. The war the Valons thought they had already won was over before it began, and Earth, untouched, stood as the predator in a galaxy that now trembled. The fear spreads, the battlefield was silent. Where once the Valon fleet had roared with power, now only wreckage drifted. Fire lit the void. Shattered ships floated like broken bones, and signals of surrender flickered weakly. It was over, and the impossible had happened. On distant worlds, the news traveled faster than light. Every listening post, every spy satellite, every council chamber across the stars caught the same signal. 100 years of Valon training had been destroyed. In 6 minutes, the galaxy froze in disbelief. In the capital of the Thriel Dominion, a counselor dropped his glass when he heard the report. "The Valons are finished," he whispered, his voice shaking. "They trained for a century." Another said, "And Still, the humans broke them like twigs. Fear crept through their halls. For if the Valons, once feared conquerors, could not last against Earth, then who could? On the mining colonies of the Jask, workers gathered around old radios. They had lived under Valon rule, whipped and beaten for decades. Now they cheered as they heard the story of Earth's victory. Tears ran down their faces as they shouted, "The humans destroyed them. The humans are free." For them, humanity was not just a warrior race. It was a savior, but in other empires, fear turned to panic. Generals stared at star maps, their hands trembling. They whispered, "What if Earth comes for us next?" For centuries they had thought of humans as small, a world barely known. Now they realized Earth was a sleeping predator, and it had just awakened. Merchants in space stations raised their prices overnight. Rumors spread faster than trade ships. "Did you hear?" One said, "Earth has ships larger than moons." "No," another argued, "they fight with invisible weapons. They erased the Valons before they even saw them." Every rumor grew wilder, every retelling darker. The galaxy did not just believe humanity was strong. They believed humanity was unstoppable. In the shattered remains of the Valon fleet, survivors drifted in broken escape pods. Their messages of defeat were broadcast across the stars. "We trained 100 years. One captain cried, his voice broken. "And we lasted 6 minutes, 6 minutes." Those words became the story every world repeated. 6 minutes, a phrase that carried more fear than 1,000 battles. The Galactic Council, once dismissive of Earth, now sat in silence. Their chambers, usually filled with arguments, were quiet as stone. One elder finally spoke. "We thought the humans were young, untested." Another shook his head. "No, they were waiting for fools like the Valons to test them." None dared to suggest action. To speak against Earth now was to sign one's death sentence. On Earth there was no celebration. No parades, no cheers, no songs of victory. The humans returned to silence, their fleets vanishing back into the shadows to the galaxy. That silence was terrifying. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a predator that had eaten its fill and was waiting for the next challenge. A child on a distant planet asked her father, "Are the humans monsters?" The father shook his head, whispering, "No, they are worse. They are survivors." That word spread too. Survivors. The galaxy began to see humanity not as conquerors, but as something far more dangerous. A race that could not be broken. A race that would rise from anything. For the first time in history, entire empires changed their plans. Warlords canceled invasions, fearing humans might intervene. Pirates abandoned routes near Earth's borders, terrified of meeting even one human patrol ship, and politicians reshaped their speeches, promising friendship with Earth, even if Earth had not asked for it. But inside every heart there was the same thought. If humans could destroy the Valons in 6 minutes, then no one was safe. The galaxy trembled, not because of what humanity had done, but because of what humanity might do next. The truth of humanity. Among the wreckage of the Valon fleet, a single warship still floated. Its engines were dead, its weapons silenced, but inside, survivors clung to life. Humans boarded the crippled ship, moving with quiet precision. They did not shout, they did not boast, they simply entered like shadows. At the heart of the ruined vessel they found him, the High General of the Valons, the one who had spent a century training his people for this war. He stood in chains now, his once proud armor cracked and broken. Still his eyes burned with questions. They brought him before a human officer. The officer was not dressed in grand robes, not wrapped in medals. He wore simple combat armor, scratched from years of battle. His voice was calm, steady, without anger. "You trained for 100 years, the human said, but you never understood us." The High General spat in rage. "We fought in deserts, in storms, in the void itself. We suffered more than any race alive." His voice cracked. "How did you break us in minutes?" His words were not defiance, they were desperation. He wanted to know the truth. The human officer stepped closer, his eyes hard. "You trained soldiers," he said, "but Earth raised survivors." The room grew quiet. "Your people practiced, For war and safe camps with rules, with limits, the officer continued. Ours learned in real chaos, in storms that could kill, in disasters that erased cities, in wars we never wanted but always endured. The High General trembled, but the human did not stop. You thought we were weak because we value peace, he said, but peace is not weakness. It is restraint. It is patience. His voice lowered. We do not fight for glory. We fight to live, and there is nothing stronger than that. The Vaylon's mind cracked under the weight of those words. For a century, he had believed discipline and training made warriors. But here stood a race that had learned from life itself. Every human storm, every earthquake, every famine, every war had shaped them. Not into soldiers, but into predators that survived everything. The officer leaned closer, his final words cold as iron. You trained for 100 years to conquer Earth, he said. We had thousands of years living on a death world that trained us to conquer the galaxy. The truth hit harder than any weapon. The High General fell silent, his pride crushed, his spirit broken. Around him, his soldiers wept, their faith in their empire destroyed. The humans had not just defeated them, they had revealed a truth that would haunt them forever. News of this interrogation spread quickly. Alien spies carried whispers back to their worlds. The story was repeated in taverns, in temples, in government halls. Humans are not soldiers, they said. Humans are survivors. And that word carried more weight than any weapon. In distant worlds, alien commanders looked at their armies and felt fear. How could they fight a race that had been forged by the very planet they lived on? A world filled with storms, earthquakes, predators, and endless wars. A world that raised not warriors but unbreakable survivors. Children in alien schools heard the tale and shivered. They asked their teachers, "Why are humans so dangerous?" And the teachers whispered the same answer. Because they never stop. No matter what the world throws at them, they endure. The Vaylons, once feared across the stars, were now remembered only for their failure. 100 years of training, gone in 6 minutes. And the reason was not hidden weapons, not secret fleets. The reason was humanity itself. A truth simple and terrifying. Earth raised predators and the galaxy had awakened them. The High General never spoke again. He sat in silence, staring at the floor of his prison cell. His empire was gone, his people broken, his pride shattered. And in his last thoughts, one question remained. How can any race ever stand against humanity? The silent message. The galaxy waited for Earth to speak. After the fall of the Vaylons, every empire, every council, every warlord held their breath. They expected threats, they expected demands, they expected the humans to rise as conquerors, but nothing came. Human fleets drifted back into the dark. The wreckage of the Vaylon armada burned in orbit, a silent warning to all who watched. Yet Earth did not claim new territory, did not send ambassadors, did not raise banners. Instead, humanity withdrew into silence. That silence was more terrifying than any weapon. Alien rulers argued in their courts, shouting for answers. Why do they not speak? One asked. What are they planning? Another demanded, but no one knew. The humans had shown their strength, then vanished back into the void. On frontier stations, smugglers whispered to one another. They could strike anywhere, anytime. And we wouldn't even know until it was too late. Some stopped traveling near Earth systems, fearing invisible fleets in the shadows, trade routes bent around human space. As if the stars themselves were marked forbidden, the Galactic Council tried to send envoys. Shuttles arrived at Earth's edge, filled with diplomats carrying messages of peace. But the humans did not answer. The ships waited days, then weeks, but no reply ever came. It was as if Earth was saying, "We see you, but you are not worth our words." Across the stars, the silence spread like a shadow. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a predator after feeding. Every species understood that feeling in their bones. The wolf that kills but does not howl, the serpent that strikes but does not hiss. It was a silence that promised more violence if tested. In the halls of the Draktor Empire, a young prince spoke. Perhaps humans wish to conquer us, he said. But an older general shook his head. his voice heavy with dread. "No," he said. "They do not wish to conquer. They do not need to. They only wait. And if we force them again, they will erase us in minutes." Among common people, rumors grew into legends. Some said Earth had fleets hidden on every border. Others whispered that humans carried weapons inside their very blood. Stories spread of human soldiers who never died, who fought even without air, without food, without rest. Every telling made the silence darker, heavier, more frightening. And on Earth itself, the people carried on as if nothing had happened. Children went to school. Farmers worked their fields. Workers built more ships. They did not celebrate. They did not boast. They simply prepared for whatever came next. The galaxy thought this strange, but the truth was simple. For humans, survival was not special. It was normal. In a hidden chamber of the Galactic Council, a voice finally broke the tension. "They do not need to speak," one counselor said. "The silence is their message." The others shivered because they understood. It was not surrender Earth wanted, not alliances, not tribute. The message was clear. Do not test us again. The phrase spread across the galaxy like fire. Merchants spoke it in markets. Soldiers muttered it in training camps. Children repeated it in their games, pretending to be human fleets. "Do not test us again," they whispered. And each time fear grew deeper. The Valons had fallen, their empire reduced to ashes. But it was not their destruction that terrified the stars. It was the silence that followed. A silence that made every race wonder if they might be next. A silence that promised 6 minutes of fury if anyone dared challenge Earth again. And so humanity's most powerful weapon was not its guns, not its ships, not even its warriors. It was its silence. A silence that turned into a shadow across the galaxy. A silence that spoke louder than any threat. And in that silence, the galaxy learned fear. 6 minutes that changed everything. The galaxy never forgot. 6 minutes had erased a century of training. 6 minutes had destroyed the Valons. 6 minutes had rewritten history, across every star, across every empire. That number became a curse and a warning. In academies where young officers once studied Valon strategies, the textbooks were thrown away. The new lessons were simple. "Do not provoke Earth," the instructors said. No one questioned it. No one argued. The fear of 6 minutes lived in every classroom, in every mind. On distant colonies, parents whispered the story to their children. "Once, there was a race that trained for 100 years to invade Earth," they said. And in 6 minutes, they were gone. The children gasped, some in awe, some in fear. And even at that young age, they understood the meaning. Humans were different. Humans were unbreakable. The Valons themselves faded into ruins. Their cities fell silent. Their banners turned to dust. Survivors lived in shame, hiding in remote systems, afraid to speak their old chants. Once they had shouted, "Earth will fall." Now they whispered, "We fell in 6 minutes." Their pride was not only broken, it was erased. Among other species, songs began to rise, but they were not songs of human weakness or cruelty. They were songs of inevitability. Ballads of the day predators woke from their long patience. Legends of the 6 minutes when humanity's name became eternal. In the chambers of the Galactic Council, silence still lingered. Every time the name Earth was spoken, the room grew tense. Allies promised loyalty, enemies hid in fear. But humanity itself did not attend those meetings. They did not beg for a seat, did not demand power. They walked away, leaving only the wreckage of the Valons as their signature, and that choice was more terrifying than conquest. For a conqueror takes and rules, but a predator simply waits, knowing it can strike again whenever it chooses. The galaxy understood this, and it made them tremble. Scholars tried to explain it. They wrote that humanity's strength came not from weapons, but from Earth itself. A death world filled with storms, quakes, predators, and endless struggle. They argued that any race raised in such a place would become dangerous. But deep inside, everyone knew the truth. It was not just the world, it was the people. Humans carried survival in their blood, in their spirit, in their silence. On Earth, life went on. Children studied in schools. Ships were built in hidden yards. Farmers planted crops under quiet skies. The humans did not see themselves as legends. To them, the 6 minutes were simply another test of survival. They had faced storms greater than fleets, disasters greater than armies. To survive was not glory. It was simply life. But beyond Earth, their image grew larger than life. Aliens painted murals of burning Valon ships. Merchants carved coins with the number 6 stamped into the metal. Priests in far-off temples prayed never to anger the humans. Even pirates, the lawless scourge of the void, avoided human borders, as if death itself guarded them. The High General of the Valons died in his cell, silent to the end. But his last thought was the same as the galaxy's. How can anyone fight a race that does not fear death, a race that does not need centuries to prepare, a race that survives everything? And so the legend was sealed. Not in books, not in monuments, but in the minds of every living being in the galaxy. 6 minutes. That was all it took for humanity to become eternal. 6 minutes. That was all. It took to turn Earth into a name whispered in both fear and respect. 6 minutes. That was all it took to change the galaxy forever. And as the stars turned, as empires rose and fell, the truth remained. Humans were not prey. Humans were predators. And the galaxy would never test them again,